You know, he was a pope of so many firsts, a man from, as he called it, the end of the world, who really set out to reshape one of the world's oldest institutions. Today, we're going to dive into the transformative and, let's be honest, complex legacy of Pope Francis. So let's start this story, well, at the end. It's April 21st, 2025, and the world gets the news. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the 266th Pope, has passed away at 88. That announcement marked the close of one of the most game-changing papacies in modern history. For 12 years, from the moment he was elected in 2013 to his death in 2025, Pope Francis was the guide for the world's 1.3 billion Catholics. And what an era it was. It was defined by huge changes, really unexpected gestures, and just a radical shift in what the church focused on. So it really makes you wonder, right? Who exactly was Jorge Bergoglio? The man from Argentina who took the name Francis and just started remaking the papacy from day one. To really get a handle on his legacy, we've got to go back to the beginning. You know, when he first appeared on that balcony at St. Peter's Basilica, he made this little joke. He said his fellow cardinals had gone to the end of the world to find a new bishop of Rome. And you know what? In a lot of ways, they really had. I mean, his election was absolutely revolutionary on so many fronts. He was the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, the first from the Southern Hemisphere. And get this, the first pope from outside Europe in over 1,200 years. Every single one of those firsts was a signal that a massive shift was coming. And you could see the difference right away. It was immediate and so symbolic. He turned down the lavish papal apartments and chose to live in a simple guest house instead. He said no to that traditional, ornate red cape, and instead of a gold papal ring, he picked a simple silver one and kept the same old iron cross he'd worn as a cardinal. The message couldn't have been clearer. His first actions were these small things, but they were so powerful. Like the day after he was elected, he personally went back to the guest house where he'd been staying and insisted on paying his own bill. It was just such a clear sign of humility and a total break from papal privilege right from the jump. But this new style? This was just the beginning. It was all pointing directly to the real substance of his papacy, a mission to reorient the church, to turn its priorities back toward the poor and the marginalized. This one observation, honestly, it just cuts right to the heart of his entire time as pope. Where his predecessors often zeroed in on doctrinal issues around sex and morality, Francis felt the church needed to talk a whole lot less about those things and way, way more about economic injustice. And believe me, he did not mince words. He was a fierce critic of trickle-down economics and what he called the idolatry of money. He was out there openly calling for things like a universal basic income and higher taxes on billionaires, basically arguing for a global economy that serves people, not the other way around. This focus on money wasn't just about the outside world either. He was specifically given a mandate by the cardinals who elected him to clean up the Vatican's own messy finances. So he took on the Vatican Bank, an institution that had been plagued by corruption for years, and he pushed for a level of transparency that was just totally unprecedented. Okay, so what about some of the most divisive social issues? How did he handle those? Well, this is where you see a really critical distinction. Francis was way more focused on changing the church's pastoral tone than he was on changing its official doctrines. This single sentence, just said casually to reporters on a plane, might be the most famous thing he ever said. Now, it didn't change church teaching one bit, but it completely changed the church's posture, from one of condemnation to one of compassion. It was a seismic shift in tone. And you see this pattern across different issues. Take homosexuality. The core doctrine didn't change, but he opened the door for priests to bless individuals in same-sex relationships. Or the role of women. While the priesthood was still reserved for men, he appointed a whole bunch of women to high-ranking Vatican jobs and, for the very first time, gave them the right to vote at major church meetings. In his mind, the church had become, and this was his word, obsessed with a tiny set of rules, and in the process, it was losing sight of its core message of mercy. He wasn't trying to throw out the rules, but he desperately wanted to find a new balance that put love and forgiveness right back at the center of the conversation. And his influence? Oh, it wasn't just confined to the church. Pope Francis quickly became a major player on the world stage, engaging directly with some of the most pressing global issues of our time. The sheer scope of his work was incredible. He wrote a landmark encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, that framed climate change as a moral crisis. He was a key diplomat who helped the US and Cuba restore ties. He traveled all the way to Canada to personally apologize for the church's horrific role in the residential schools. And he formally changed church teaching to say the death penalty is unacceptable in every single case. So, as we circle back to the end of his life, how do we sum it all up? What's the legacy? Well, one thing's for sure, he left behind a church that was profoundly different from the one he inherited. And this right here, this might be his most concrete, long-lasting legacy. It's in the men he chose to lead the church after him. He appointed about 80% of the cardinals who will elect his successor. By picking leaders from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, he shattered the European dominance of the church, basically ensuring his global vision would carry on. But of course, his legacy is complicated. It's not a simple story. He absolutely fostered a more merciful tone and put the focus back on the poor. But his papacy was also deeply shadowed by a significant failure. He faced intense criticism for how he handled the global sex abuse crisis. Many argue his actions were just too slow, too insufficient, and that remains a deep stain on his record. So ultimately, he leaves a church that is less European, more global, but one that is still grappling with its most painful wounds. For 12 years, that was Pope Francis's job, to guide this ancient institution through our turbulent modern world, trying to balance 2,000 years of tradition with the urgent calls for change. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? After a pope who broke so many traditions, what tradition comes next? By reshaping the papacy and the very men who will choose the next pope, Francis made sure his revolution wouldn't just end with him. The only question now is what a church remade in his image will do next.